For an entire 1,000 years, think about that, from the 5th to the 15th century, Europe was really defined by one single force, a religion that went from a persecuted belief to the absolute heart of an entire continent. The real question is, how on earth did that happen?
I mean, really, how did Christianity get so completely tangled up with power, with culture, with the daily lives of millions of people, that it literally shaped the identity of Europe for a millennium? Well, that's the puzzle we're going to unpack together.
To get a grip on the Middle Ages, you really have to understand this one massive shift. See, Christianity didn't just become a major religion, it became the undisputed authority on pretty much everything, from who was king to how you lived your life, from wars to art. This total transformation is the bedrock of the entire era.
So, how did they pull it off? Well, it all starts with how the church built its incredible power and its institutional framework. Because, this wasn't just about faith, it was about structure.
And sitting right at the top of this whole structure was the Pope. Now, the papacy's power didn't just show up overnight. It grew in stages. First, it started with spiritual authority. Then, that spiritual cloud translated into real political influence, where popes were advising and, often clashing with kings and emperors. And from there, it even developed its own legal system that governed everything from marriage to heresy.
And the church had these two really powerful but very different arms. On one hand, you had the monastic orders. Think of them as the quiet preservers of knowledge, meticulously copying ancient texts behind monastery walls. But on the other hand, you had the mendicant orders, folks like the Franciscans and Dominicans, who took their faith right out into the streets, preaching and serving the poor in the growing towns. So one group preserved the past, while the other engaged with the present.
And that role as keepers of knowledge, it was absolutely vital. Monasteries weren't just for prayer. They were basically Europe's libraries, saving all this wisdom from the ancient world. You could argue that without them, the Renaissance might never have happened. This preservation of knowledge laid the groundwork for Europe's very first universities, which became these buzzing hubs where theology and philosophy were fiercely debated.
And out of these universities came this powerful new way of thinking called scholasticism. Its goal was incredibly ambitious, to prove that faith and reason weren't enemies but partners. Thinkers like St. Thomas Aquinas famously used the logic of Aristotle to dissect Christian theology. It really shows you this wasn't an age of just blind faith. It was an age of intense intellectual effort to build this complete, rational Christian worldview.
Okay, so we've seen the big picture, the top-down structure. But what was it actually like for the average person? How did all of this translate into daily life?
Well, just look at a medieval cathedral. These weren't just buildings, they were massive public statements of faith. I mean, with their soaring spires and crazy intricate designs, they were built to inspire total awe, to pull your eyes and your soul up towards God. They were kind of like the space shuttles of their day, just incredible feats of engineering and art.
Religion was just woven into every single moment of life. The sacraments guided you from the moment you were born until the day you died. Praying to saints and venerating relics offered real hope for miracles. Taking these epic pilgrimages to holy sites were profound spiritual journeys. And for the vast majority of people who couldn't read, the art and the stained glass in the churches, that was their Bible.
And spreading these ideas required some pretty clever communication. The story of St. Patrick is just a perfect example. The Holy Trinity, it's a complicated idea, right? 3 persons in one God. So how do you explain that to people? Well, you use a simple, everyday object like a shamrock. It was exactly that kind of accessible teaching that helped Christianity take root all across the continent.
But this unified Christian Europe, this idea of Christendom, well, it wasn't destined to last forever. The late Middle Ages brought a series of deep crises that began to shake the very foundations of the Church's authority.
The late Middle Ages just delivered one devastating blow after another. In 1054, the church itself split right down the middle. Then, the 14th century brought 2 unimaginable catastrophes, a plague that killed millions and a leadership crisis so bad that you had multiple men all claiming to be the one true pope.
So that first split, the Great Schism of 1054, was like a permanent divorce. It formally divided Christianity into the 2 traditions that we still have today, the Roman Catholic Church in the West, led by the Pope in Rome, and the Eastern Orthodox Church, led by the Patriarch in Constantinople.
Then came the Black Death, a plague on a scale that's just hard to imagine, killing up to half of Europe's entire population. A trauma that huge had profound religious consequences. While some people doubled down on their faith, seeing it all as divine punishment, others began to ask a really dangerous question.
Why was the church totally powerless to stop this? And at the very top, the church's leadership was just collapsing. First, the papacy moved to Avignon, and it looked like a puppet of the French king. Then came the Great Western Schism, where you had 2 and for a while 3 rival popes all claiming authority at the same time. This chaos absolutely shattered the church's prestige and fueled these widespread, desperate calls for reform.
So the foundation was definitely cracked, and these crises, combined with a revolutionary new technology, mark the end of an era and set the stage for something entirely new.
1455. What happened in this one year that would change the world forever?
In 1455, a man named Johannes Gutenberg used his printing press to produce the first printed Bible. Now, before this moment, books were all handwritten, a slow, incredibly expensive process controlled almost entirely by the church. The printing press completely shattered that monopoly on information. It allowed the Word of God to be put directly into the hands of the people for the very first time.
And this was really the final piece of the puzzle. You had widespread doubt from the plague and the schism, combined with these constant calls for reform. Now you add a technology that could spread new ideas like wildfire. The stage was perfectly set for the religious revolution we now call the Protestant Reformation.
And that brings us to a final question about legacy. I mean, the Christian Middle Ages gave Europe universities and breathtaking art, and it saved the classical knowledge that fueled the Renaissance. But it also sowed seeds of division that still echo to this day. So when you look at our world now, which of those legacies feels louder, the unity or the division? That's something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.